Today on the Topping Show, Megan Rapinoe misses the World Cup goal and laughs. Bud Light's founder's grandson slams Anheuser Busch InBev's choice to partner with Dylan Mulvaney. Trump critiques the U.S. women's soccer team. Elon Musk to pay the legal fees for people who are fired for using Twitter X. Joe Rogan drinks a Bud Light and is critiqued by conservatives. Harry's Razors commercial has a topless biological woman transitioning, shaving her face. Nasar indefinitely suspends a driver for liking a meme. Barbie Movie passes $1 billion in sales. Joe Rogan claims Kari Lake's election appeared to have some fraud, and the media melts down. Democrats put forward legislation to tax AR-15 magazines and rifles at 1,000%. Mercedes to bring back the V8 engine. Dallas-Fort Worth is one of the fastest growing areas in the United States. Berkshire Hathaway reaches a $36 billion profit. Tesla CFO steps down, and Yellow Trucking has confirmed its bankruptcy. All of that and much, much more on The Topic Show. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to tune in today. Today's episode of Topic Show is sponsored by Topping Technologies. Topping Technologies is an IT value-added reseller and services company with a special proficiency in IT security. Heck, I see their founder at least twice a day. Guys say he's quite handsome and brilliant. He's me, that's the joke. If you're an IT leader or a business owner, need a little assistance, you can reach the team at sales@toppingtechnologies.com. Also trying to get to 3,000 subscribers by the end of August, so you can click that button and greatly appreciate it. Now, going over to the business part of the podcast, you have finally some great automotive news. You have Mercedes bringing back the V8 AMG. Now, recently, their most powerful AMG C-Class, the C63, they decided to trade the iconic hand-built V8 internal combustion engine for a hybridized inline turbo 4 engine. And yeah, to say that's anemic is to say the least. Now, there's nothing wrong with the 4-cylinder engine. My Honda Civic Si has a 4-cylinder engine. I love it, partially because it comes with a 3 pedals in terms of a manual transmission. But people buy a Mercedes, the pinnacle of German, well, I'd say Porsche, but nevertheless, a highly respectable German automotive brand. And AMG, you wind back the clock, hand-built, German engineering. There's something special about a premium luxury brand coming with what is slowly becoming, unfortunately, a more rare and rare occurrence of the internal combustion engine and the V8. 4 cylinders is great, but 8 is great. It rhymes, therefore it must be true. But in all seriousness, it looks like they also had their E-Class and an upcoming E63 had an inline 6 engine with a plug-in hybrid setup. Now, again, it's one of those things where there's nothing inherently, well, depending on who you ask, I know who you ask, there's nothing inherently wrong with hybrids or smaller engines. A wise man much smarter than me once said there's a time and place for everything. And I think if, from the ground up, if Mercedes were to come out with a new product line, again, they name everything after numbers like BMW to make it complex, so you'll have to be an enthusiast to know the actual model numbers. But if they were to build one from the ground up that's originally a hybrid, which I think BMW is doing with a couple of their electric vehicles, there probably wouldn't be as much visceral backlash from the good old enthusiasts. Now, the good news is they're bringing back the V8 to specifically the models the C63 and the E63, both back by 2026. Now, it looks like it'll be a reinstitution of the M177 4-liter V8, which is actually, according to 2 independent sources. And of course, unfortunately, due to goal of the emissions and all that kind of stuff, they're actually in process of trying to have it modified so it'll meet the EU7 emission standards. Granted, one country produces more pollutants than all the other countries combined, but let's not focus on China. Let's focus on everyone else but them. But it is nice to see finally a brand listening to the consumers as people precipitously lost interest in those models and their sales hurt, of course. You saw this with the Mercedes. Very few people know the actual term for it, but it's pejoratively known, or just regularly known as the G-Wagon, which had a huge, I think it was 150% increase in sales for the V8 version, because they told people it's going to go down, I believe, an inline 6 or a 4-cylinder, which it's a big boxy SUV. It's an iconic part of the brand. It's been around for decades, originally made to be a military vehicle. Obviously, people want the V8. So people are paying a premium. Mercedes said they're going to go away with it. Interest dropped dramatically. And thankfully, they're going to be bringing a lot of the big toys back. So it'll be interesting to see how many other companies in the automotive community are going to listen to the consumers. You have General Motors, which again wants to be fully electric by 2035. That's according to the CEO, Mary Barra. They're turning the Camaro, an iconic American muscle car, into a 4-door EV sedan. No one is going to buy that. Oh, I take it back. The 18 people who work at General Motors will because they have the friends and family discount. But if you own a 4-door EV sedan, most people, realistically, they're going with the Tesla. If they want a performance car or one that's more tuned for performance, they probably get the Porsche Taycan, which has 4 doors, EV, and that was actually engineered so you can push that vehicle to the limit until the battery dies. It doesn't actually neuter the vehicle by pulling back on the power regardless of the percentage left in the battery, because Porsche wanted it to be made for people who actually want to drive. Now, granted, it's still not as good as having 3 pedals, but still an interesting use case, and hopefully more automotive companies will do what's right for the consumer, aka listen to the free market. But as I always say, time shall tell. Other interesting business news, you have Dallas-Fort Worth becoming one of the fastest growing metropolitan areas in the United States. Now, it looks like it may even become, right now with the given trajectory of everyone moving here, it might even become more populous than Chicago, which isn't saying much, as Chicago is losing companies left and right. One of the most iconic companies in the United States is Boeing. The legacy aerospace company who dominated in the military segment, went on the commercial segment, is now one of the most reputable brands in history. Even they left Chicago. Their global headquarters is no longer in Chicago. Companies are leaving that area in droves. And where are they going? Texas, Florida. You think these other states might learn, but no, it would be the antithesis of everything they stand for. Now, in terms of Texas growing exponentially, it was like in DFW alone, Fort Worth actually alone, that one city, which in my opinion, all of Texas should really be like the stockyards in Fort Worth, which is where everyone wears cowboy hats, and it's really the heart of Texas, many would say. Now, that city alone has gained 19,000 residents between July 2021 and July 2022. More than any other U.S. city. That's astronomically impressive for a growth rate. In terms of businesses, 265 businesses have either relocated or expanding to Texas since 2020. That type of growth rate is astronomically impressive. In the past 6 months alone, just off the top of my head, one of the most iconic manufacturers in history, Caterpillar, relocated, I believe, from Illinois over to Irving, Texas. Businesses are coming here in droves. Now, hopefully the people who come here remember why they're coming here, and they don't try to change the tax codes or anything like that accordingly. But it's interesting to see more and more businesses are choosing Texas than any other place. Perhaps other places will learn, catch on, perhaps. Time, as I always say, shall tell. But great news for the state, or some might say the country, of Texas. Now, other interesting business news, you have Berkshire Hathaway reaching $36 billion in profit. The Oracle of Omaha is spot on as usual. Although the only person better than him is Nancy Pelosi's husband, who actually trades better than Warren Buffett. Who knows why that could possibly occur? But I digress. In terms of Berkshire Hathaway, last Saturday, they posted their highest ever quarterly operating profit at $10.04 billion, which, even with a down economy, 40-year hyperinflation, it's still 7% higher than the prior year before. So it looks like their net income for the fiscal year till now hit $36 billion. Now, in terms of the breakdown of how they're so successful right now, fiscally speaking, it looks like one of their premier golden child, so to say, the diamond in the rough that keeps making them more and more money, is the insurance industry, which makes sense. On average, it's a pretty profitable venture. That's why there's a lot of startups, there's a lot of companies expanding in that area. And it looks like Geico is actually one of their best performing companies. And it looks like they need it because it's actually offsetting the losses from other companies such as BNSF, which is one of the largest railroad operating companies headquartered in Fort Worth, Texas. Now, that company actually saw a 24% profit drop thanks to consumer shipments decreasing, as well as competition from the trucking industry. Now, it looks like Berkshire Hathaway also finished the quarter with $147.4 billion in cash and cash equivalents, which is a near record, which is an astronomical amount of fiscal success. Can't help but wonder what they're going to continue investing. Apple, precipitously, they're getting their sales quarter to quarter decreasing. You're actually getting kneecapped pretty bad with the iPhone sales decreasing, so their stock also precipitously declined. Warren is one of those brilliant investors. He likes to invest in many tangible items. They bought out Acme Brick, also headquartered in Fort Worth, a couple years back. And so it'll be interesting to see where does he choose to invest. And again, I'm no financial analyst. I just can't help but notice he's very good at making mostly really good choices. So it'll be interesting to see where he chooses to invest. I would venture to say probably businesses in Texas would be a pretty safe bet, I would guess. Now, other interesting business news, you have Tesla's CFO stepping down. So it looks like CFO Zach Kirkland will be stepping down before the Cybertruck official launch. And a lot of people are speculating he might have been the long-term CEO. And there's a lot of speculation of was he being groomed or was he being bolstered for that position. But it looks like he's actually being gone. So it looks like he's been the CFO for about 4 years, and with Tesla as a total for about 13 years. And they even gave him a cool nickname, the Master of Coin, which, I mean, that these days people don't use coins in terms of monetary value, but still it gets the message across, since throughout history coins used to be made with precious or real metals as opposed to zinc like the United States uses for the penny, which is 99.99% zinc and just barely copper plated. So if you scratch it with a little, even a fingernail base, I joke, it'd probably have to be a pen, you can see it's mostly zinc, which is mostly garbage. But perhaps a metaphor for another time. It looks like Chief Accounting Officer Vijay Tenja will be succeeding Kirkhorn, who Tesla said will stay on through the end of the year for a, quote, seamless transition, unquote. Now, they've loved the previous CFO, Zach, because he helped the company pay down debt, and of course, CFOs are kind of like wizards to some people in terms of it always pays to have a good accountant, and a CFO is key for a company's long-term success, since the tax code in the United States is so complex. You almost need a supercomputer to really analyze it and see how are you properly paying your taxes, or are you overpaying, which is even worse, because if you overpay, you don't get that money back with interest. If you underpay, they charge you with interest. So it's one of those things where being right on the money is key, because all that money that you're giving them for free or you're overpaying, that could be invested into a new factory, employee salaries. So it's one of those very, very careful balancing act, and having a good CFO is key. So it'll be interesting to see how Tesla goes from here. Now, going on to the culture part of the podcast, you have Megan Rapinoe missing a World Cup goal and laughing. Now, I don't know if I could take credit for this nickname. It's not that great, but when I thought of this nickname from Megan Rapinoe, I had a voice in my head, and you know the voice, but when it comes to Megan Rapinoe, I have to say she is mediocre Megan. She can't even hit the side of a goal. She missed by miles. Anyone could hit that goal, even a child. That's why the high school boys beat her in a game. But I digress. And I apologize if that is perhaps the worst Trump impression you've ever heard to this date. The bar's pretty low in terms of the impressions. Everyone does it. But she missed a goal from mere feet away. And not only did she miss a regular goal, which, again, when you have adults playing soccer, or men's soccer, you have a lot of conflict in terms of people bounce off each other. That you can get people get physical, get knocked down. You might even get a scratch on your knee. But in this case, it was a penalty kick, which is the easiest kick of all. It's literally where there's no chance of interference. You don't have to worry about someone clobbering you or bashing you to the ground. You're literally, the whole stadium's in awe. All 18 gals in the audience watching the U.S. women's soccer, they're all looking at Megan Rapinoe. Mediocre Megan, and they watched, and Megan, with, again, no pressure in terms of no one's going to hit her, no one's going to knock her over, it's her versus the goalie. And the goal is pretty damn close. And the goal is pretty darn big. And she misses completely. And she, of course, missed. Now, this actually helped contribute to the downfall of the U.S. women's soccer team. And it looks like last Sunday they were defeated because of those penalty kicks in part, and they lost to Sweden. And this is the earliest exit ever for U.S. women's soccer team. Now, granted, very few people notice because statistically speaking, very people actually tune in. FIFA actually had to give away 20,000 tickets for one of the U.S. women's soccer events in New Zealand because no one was buying them, which goes to show you why men are paid more. It's nothing to do with sexism or being pejorative against one versus the other. It's quite simply supply and demand. Much more people tune in for the men's sport. And May would say, well, U.S. globally is about 50% men and 50% women. If every woman turned into the sport, they'd be paid them out because they'd be sick. I digress. But it's fascinating to see. Perhaps she should have spent more time practicing and less time being a political activist. And she, perhaps in her mediocrity, the whole world laughed at her, but even she laughed at herself, perhaps. She was seen laughing while she's walking away. And it's fascinating to see FIFA, they're being very litigious or very protective of this film. Well, I guess nowadays it's not film, it's all digital. Unless you're good old Christopher Nolan making the Oppenheimer movie. Physical film is very much a dying area. But I digress. FIFA is actually striking channels that use the actual footage of Megan missing epically. Perhaps because they're so embarrassed, but they should be proud. This is the first time in decades people have tuned in to see a highlight clip from the U.S. Women's Soccer Open. And I'm only 7% kidding. It's astronomical. Now, when I asked for further comment, because people actually, for some reason, wanted to hear what she wanted to say, which is oddly enough something I didn't think was possible, but a couple of them went up to her because she's supposed to be retiring. She's 38 years old, which again in sports is pretty darn old, and I can't help but wonder: is she the best performer, or is she the best soccer performer, or is she just the best political performer? How did she get that spot on the team? But another topic for another time, perhaps. When a reporter went up and they asked her, what's your greatest memory from this game? You've had this long career. You've won a couple games. You've had some highlights. What's your favorite memory? Was it beating a really hard team? Was it coming together, working with the gals on the field and really hard practices, or some type of camaraderie that you built? No, her favorite memory was quote unquote equal pay, which again is for unequal performance, because performance-wise they don't perform as well as any other sports. Less people tuning in means less sponsors care, because sponsors pay per person tuning in. Whether it's an app on your phone or something on the TV, when they negotiate these contracts with all the big companies from PepsiCo to Coca-Cola to mom and pop shops who want to put their logo out there, the main topic they ask is how many people tune in, because the more people who tune into the sport, the more valuable that time is. That's why the Super Bowl ads are worth millions of dollars, because so many Americans have their eyeballs glued to the TV. It's purely fiscally a numbers game. How many people are tuning in, how much they spend on merchandising, all that kind of stuff. And she said her favorite memory was equal pay. And she went on to say that advocating for social issues are a couple of her other favorite things from being on a soccer team. Which, again, when I think of her quote-unquote social contributions is a positive good thing. She mainly, sat down on the national, I guess she didn't sit. She did kneel, so I guess it takes a modicum of effort. Mediocre, Megan, or modicum of effort, Megan? You decide in the comment section which nickname is more apt or more accurate. But she wanted to say that some of her favorite memories for advocating social issues have nothing to do with soccer. Well, she didn't say it had nothing to do with soccer. I had to say it had nothing to do with soccer. It wasn't representing your country, which, again, she doesn't like the United States. Look at her social media or any of her protesting. Which, again, I would say there's a time and place for peaceful protesting. I would certainly say when you're representing the United States in front of the globe, well, if she thinks the United States is so bad, why is she getting paid a gross amount of money to represent the U.S.? The hypocrisy is quite unpalatable, to say the least. But just goes to show you, perhaps it's best to not mix politics and sports, since I've yet to see it actually increase the value of a sporting team or increase the number of people tuning in to watch the sporting team. Perhaps she thinks this is her long-term career track, which Colin Kaepernick, fiscally speaking, he was successful in regards to, he was a mediocre quarterback. I think he won a game or two, but he made a lot more money just protesting. So maybe she thinks this is her next thing, as a lot of celebrities become advocates. But to say your greatest memory isn't working with the team, scoring a goal. Well, I guess she definitely didn't have that last memory. Her last attempt at a goal was an epic fail. But such a bizarre thing to not have one of your favorite memories be about the people, the team, leading the team, cultivating. The mind merely boggles. But I digress. If I were a gambling man, I would say we will hear her, whether we like it or not, very soon, because more often than not, I think she will traverse into a new career track of yelling more and kneeling more. How admirable to hate the United States, but wear the United States uniform and profit off of it. Astonishing. But I digress for now. Other interesting cultural news, you have Trump critiquing the U.S. women's soccer team loss, which, in terms of political campaigning, probably not pertinent to his campaign. However, in terms of the people that like Trump already, probably a good way to make them laugh, and they do like his tweets. Well, in this case, his truths, which is his own social media network. Now, specifically, he said that the team's flameout was, quote, fully emblematic of what is happening to our great nation. He went on to say, or unquote, quote, many of our players are openly hostile to America. No other country behaved in such a manner, or even close. Woke equals failure. Nice shot, Megan. The U.S. is going to hell. MAGA, unquote. So there are a lot of people who greatly appreciated that. I don't know if that's a pun. That's perhaps just an accurate observation to many folks, I would say. But it certainly perhaps is a good way for him to recultivate his brand of people who like him dunking on the woke mob, so to say. I don't know how much it's going to help from independent voters, which again, if you want to win politics, you need those independent voters. You need to get some people from the other side. But in terms of a cultural phenomenon, it is almost like the firework that won't stop exploding. He is consistently getting more and more social media traction to the detriment to, I'm sure, perhaps his lawyer or perhaps his social... there's no way he has a social media manager. I take that back. That job does not exist. But it is moderately comical to see everyone, to the people who love him, increasingly seem to like him, and the people who hate him, you know about him because they are quite vocal as well. But it'll be interesting to see, does this message resonate with more Americans now? Or is he alienating more folks? As I always say, time shall tell. Now, other interesting culture news, you have Bud Light's founder's grandson slamming Anheuser-Busch InBev and their interesting business blunder of partnering with Dylan Mulvaney. Now, this was a recent TMZ interview with the grandson of the founder, who is Billy Busch, and he was saying that his late father, August Gussie Busch Jr., and his father's dad, who created Anheuser-Busch InBev, and Adolphus Busch, they would be, quote, would have rolled over in their graves, unquote, if they were alive to see the financial and social repercussions wrought with the failed partnership. Now, in terms of winding back the clock in the company history and the family history, the St. Louis-based Busch family sold their stake in the firm in 2008 after having it in the family for more than 150 years. And it looks like they sold their current stake in InBev for $52 billion. Now, ever since Anheuser-Busch all became one, they actually saw their valuation swell up to $140 billion. Now, granted, much of that was erased, not much. A fair amount of that was erased once April 1st came along, and they lost, I believe, it was $28 billion in stock value ever since they partnered with Dylan Mulvaney April 1st, which I don't know if it's hindsight's 20. There is something oddly hilarious about it being April 1st, and it was not intended to be a joke, but they pissed off people on the left, on the right, and even in the middle, and they have not recovered since. In fact, they went from being the number one beer in the United States for 20 years to now 14. Modelo beat them in the United States for 2 months in a row, and I suspect it'll be 3 months in a row as well. And Modelo, again, in the United States, it's a separate company. It's owned by Constellation Brands, which I believe is headquartered in New York. Now, globally, yes, Anheuser-Busch InBev does own Modelo. So if you're buying Modelo in Spain or Portugal or overseas, you are supporting Anheuser-Busch InBev. In the United States, if you believe in the boycott, you would be safe in your boycott efforts if you were to purchase Modelo. It was actually one of the conditions that the United States Security Exchange Commissions, or the SEC, set in place for the merger of Anheuser-Busch with InBev to begin with. So now it's actually a global conglomerate with InBev being headquartered out of Belgium. They don't just make waffles and awesome rifles, apparently. Now, in terms of the family history, I think it's worth going into because it's one of those things where some people are blaming the family, thinking they had more control of the company. Why did they sell out? Well, as in many of the instances, it sometimes isn't their saying because they didn't have a majority stake in the company anymore. So, in terms of diving more into the interview, and Busch actually was speaking with TMZ's head Harvey Levin, and talking about how they lost $390 million in sales. Now they got to talk about the controversial part of the company with partnering with Dylan Mulvaney, and in that, Busch said, quote, when talking about his family's heritage and what their beliefs are in terms of religious, political, social, in this case, gender, phenomenons, and he said, they believe that transgenderism, gays, that sort of thing is all a very personal issue, unquote. Speaking for pioneering figures like his dad, August, who served as a chairman from 1946 to 1975, and Adolphus, the Missouri magnate who cooked up the first batch of Budweiser in 1876. Now, it looks like both, of course, his dad and grandfather, unfortunately, had passed, and both of his natural causes. And unfortunately, it looks like his grandfather actually ended up ending his life in 1934 after Prohibition brought his creation to the brink of bankruptcy. Now, it looks like I love business history. Let me know in the comments if you don't want as much background when you talk about companies. We can go into, here's a little highlight of where the company came from. Personally, I find it fascinating, but let me know in the comments if you want more or less of that content. Now, in terms of the history, his son August Sr. managed to save the company during Prohibition by selling soda and ice cream. which is fascinating from a business perspective to actually pivot and stay open in what was one of the most inopportune times to be a business. That's pretty impressive in and of itself. And he actually ended up building up Anheuser-Busch companies into the largest breweries, into the largest brewery in the world by 1957, which in terms of growth rate, that's astronomical. That is almost as good as the growth rate as our subscriptions. Do me a favor and click that subscribe button and help us out. Now, it looks like the family would pass the company through generations, and Billy and his several siblings and cousins would become partial owners. During this span, however, the family sold an estimated 25% stake from their ownership over the course from 1989 to 2008, which ended in a historic sale after their stake depleted to less than 5% of shares at the time, which is quite unfortunate because, again, it's still a lot of money, but basically, in terms of the breakdown of the shares of the company, once you don't have control of the company, you're at the behest of the shareholders. One of the reasons that the Ford company is still under the Ford family is because they might not have a majority of the Class A stock, which is the publicly traded stock, but the untraded stock, they have a majority of that stock. So in terms of the voting stock, they have a majority say of what the company still does to this day, even though the public can buy the stock. You and I could buy Ford if we were to want to have a share in the company. Now, it looks like because they were only at 5%, they were unable to block the transaction, which at the time between Anheuser-Busch and InBev combining was $48 billion. Now, granted, that being said, the family, including Billy and the then CEO half-nephew of August the 5th, continued to fight back, and they actually rejected InBev's initial proposal after later striking a deal for $70 per share, giving them an extra $4 billion in the sale. Now, it looks like an astonishing growth rate for the family as well. It looks like the family has an estimated 30 heirs, with Billy and his final Busch boss, August the 4th, 59 included, or age 59. And of course, unfortunately, after the sale, they had to lay off some employees, and of course, the culture changed as well. And in terms of, continuing the conversation, asking, did your family ever think of advertising campaigns, and what did they think about this? They had Billy say, quote, "They love this country because it's a free country and people are allowed to do what they want. But it was never meant to be on a beer can and pushed in people's faces." So it sounds like they're very much more socially conservative, do what you want, but you don't advertise it per se. So it is unfortunate to see what was a family business for generations eventually got diluted with the stock. And now, of course, I don't even believe he's on the board of directors. They really don't have much to do with the company anymore. And what was an icon, for decades is now, granted, they're still around. They've only quote unquote, lost $390 million in sales. Really interesting to see, how many of these up-and-coming beer companies can rival them in the future. There's only a couple left, and very few are family-owned. I know in terms of my anecdotal knowledge of the alcohol industry, Yingling is probably the most well-known beer company. It's the oldest beer company in the United States, but also one of the few that's still family-owned, that's on, I'll say, almost more of a mass scale. I'd be interested to see, could even they rival Anheuser-Busch InBev? The odds are pretty low, but some people, they like an underdog, and I would say perhaps, maybe. Other interesting cultural news, you have Elon Musk saying he will pay legal fees for users whose employers treat them unfairly for using X, which used to be known as Twitter. Now, this is fascinating. So they're saying if an employee is treated, quote unquote, unfairly by their boss for liking a post or posting a comment on the platform, Elon will pay for their legal fees. Now, of course, he did have to get more granular because that's a big topic in and of itself. Now, specifically, he will pay for any legal fees for anyone who has lost their jobs due to X content, which, again, the marketing is still determining was that a good marketing move for him to change the name from Twitter to X? Because right now, that's when people say, that you lost their job to X content. Most people are not thinking of Elon Musk because their minds are probably in the gutter. I'll let you go with your own imaginations there. Also, everyone posting a video on Elon Musk's platform is now making an X video, which is another comical meme in and of itself. And it's interesting to see, you had a NASCAR driver, which is another story today, actually lose his job because he liked something, but that was on Instagram, so unfortunately for him, he doesn't qualify for this specific instance. Now, Elon has long been very vocal about his belief of fighting and this is a quote from him, quote unquote, the woke mind virus, unquote, and he's very committed to free speech. Now, that being said, he's not a free speech absolutist. He never let Alex Jones get back on the platform of Twitter, or now X. And in terms of the litmus test, I think that's a pretty good one. Alex Jones says a lot of outlandish things, although it is quite concerning when some of them turn out to be true. But he's still an American. He's still human. He still deserves the right for free speech. So when I meet someone, that's usually a good litmus test. Do they believe in free speech, or do they just believe in their free speech, or the speech that they believe in? Which, again, in terms of politically correct or mass accepted free speech, you don't need a law for that because it's already mass accepted. Really, free speech is quite necessary, or laws for free speech, quite necessary around unpopular opinions, because they're the ones that are already in danger of being socially ostracized, but those are the ones that also they actually do need some protection, which every American used to believe in the philosophy that I may not agree with what you are saying, but I'll fight to the death for your right to say it, which is quite concerning in and of itself that more and more Americans do not believe in that, which I'm one of those old school fans of debates and philosophical discussions where I always think, let's see who has the best idea. Let's have a debate. Let's have a discussion to see what is your argument. And I also would argue it also makes you a better rounded out opinion if you absorb material and learn a little bit about all the perspectives. But I digress. It'll be interesting to see. I don't know what Elon's case is in this, because he's talking about separate privately owned companies, and right now in the United States, and granted, the laws around employment in the United States especially are quite fluid. There are some states that are actually banning the ability to fire someone based on, for example, their weight. Now, you have there's a lot of nuances, but in the United States, I believe with the exception of public jobs, so if you work for the government cannot fire you for your political ideology or your free speech, but a private employer can. And in terms of an employer's ability to hire who they want in terms of a political ideology or philosophical beliefs, I don't know how Elon, as a third party to that situation, is going to have a legal grounds to stand on. It'll be interesting. I'm sure people appreciate the symbol of him doing this, but I will be fascinated to see how the first case really hammers out with this situation. Now, other interesting culture news, you have Joe Rogan drinking a Bud Light with Zach Bryan on his show. Now, it looks like Joe Rogan actually cracked open a can of Bud Light and allegedly did not lose all his taste buds. That's still yet to be seen. And that was last Tuesday after he offered a toast to his guest, the country music star Zach Bryan. And they agreed with Joe Rogan's taste about the residual backlash against the brand. And Joe Rogan is saying, it all amounts to silliness, quote unquote. Which, one of those interesting things, I'm actually surprised for how popular he is. Granted, he has FU money, he doesn't need sponsors, but for him not to have an official beer is almost perplexing, because if he wanted to snap his fingers, he can get a lifetime supply of any beer he wants for free, because so many people tune into his show. Now, it's fascinating to see that, it's almost as if conservatives and liberals and Republicans, Democrats, they are all fighting over Joe Rogan. They all want him to be on their team and really to believe in their ideology so they can use him as an advertising vessel, or perhaps also to advertise to the youngins or the cool hip kids, like, oh, look, Joe Rogan believes in our stuff. Which, if you listen to Joe Rogan for anything more than 12 minutes, I would say, you would know he's mostly left on a lot of his social issues, in terms of his conservative beliefs, which, again, I don't think the Second Amendment should be conservative, it should be an American belief, but he's more pro-gun in that regard, but he's quite adamant about his use in recreational drugs. Conservatives usually aren't into that. So he's more left than anything else, but conservatives are so desperate for popular people to be on their side. Every once in a while, Joe Rogan will say something that is conservative, but everyone just wants him to be on their side. And in terms of Joe Rogan's history, if you watch the show, he's drank Bud Light for years. Like, if you watch his special, or not, the special, not a Netflix special, but a show where he has on his buddies, like you have Shane Gillis, Ari Shaffir, you got, I forgot who's the most racist comic in the United States. Bert Kreischer. That's an inside joke if you're in the comedy community or a fan of comedy. And it's one of those things where they all have Bud Light before. I guess in terms of Joe Rogan's not really participating in what is the boycott that many are participating in, but he's not really changed his behavior one way or the other. So I don't know why conservatives are so surprised necessarily. I mean, Joe Rogan has said his opinions about, his thoughts about transitioning and the age, and he's interviewed some, I believe it was Eddie Lizard, who's a transgender man transitioned to a woman, who's a world record for the number of marathons run. So he's interviewed folks on all sides of the political aisle, but it's fascinating to see people are getting upset about this when it's not all too surprising. But of course, if he says anything these days, he's going to get a lot of clicks because controversy ensues, because inevitably you're going to probably piss off one side or the other no matter what you say. But it is a little bit surprising, his choices on this, but he's gone back and forth. It'll be interesting to see where he goes from here. Now, other interesting culture news, you have Harry's Razors having a commercial in which they show a biological woman topless with mastectomy scars, showing that she had the surgery to voluntarily remove the breast tissue. And this person is transitioning, so they're taking testosterone. So this female has facial hair, and it's a commercial, and it's called part of Harry's Razors, saying that they're saying this is part of their partnership to partner with the Trevor Project, which if you look in that project in and of itself, has had instances where grown men are messaging younger boys around talking about sexual acts and apps. So there's controversy around that in and of itself. But this commercial, which again is on the internet, it's being seen by kids, I'll play it. It's only about 34 seconds long, but it's something I would never have thought had been on TV, or I guess in this case, the Twitter sphere, because of the lack of an real age limit on Twitter. They don't ask for an ID yet. But let's play it. So first it says, celebrating my first pride with facial hair. So the Harry's Razor has a green handle, and it looks like the biological woman is with a biological woman with long hair, standing next to her. So fully topless with the scars. And it says, growing up, I was always envious of boys going through puberty, getting facial hair, and learning how to shave. So now she's putting on the shaving cream. It says, I love growing a beard and maintaining it. Having facial hair and a grooming routine is the most gender-affirming thing to me. Which I would say it's insensitive because some men can't grow beards. So is that pejorative statement in and of itself? Will this person be canceled? I doubt it. But this person is using it almost looks like a brush you use for a shoe on their face, which I guess I missed the memo. I didn't know that was required for facial maintenance. And this is also, it looks like the packaging is Harry's Flamingo. I don't know if that's specifically for them, but it's also fascinating to see Harry's Razors continue down this path of being much more, I guess politically speaking, this is bizarrely enough one of the things that became political. It's now, they're kind of leaning into it. So not only did that commercial drop, but you have the founders and the CEO of Harry's Razors, they don't believe in men and women anymore, or moms or dads. So this is again, only 38 seconds of pain for your ears. But this is them talking about parents.
Unbalanced dynamic, and created a really sort of unbalanced dynamic, and made the co-parenting thing really hard to actually live in practice. And so, that experience, was one that led us to this conclusion that, hey, we need not just a general parental leave policy, but an equal parental leave policy that treats birthing and non-birthing parents equally. So we've implemented that and give everybody 4 months, regardless of whether you're the birthing parent or the non-birthing parent.
This is something that bizarrely we saw a couple years ago when people thought it was pejorative to insinuate that moms exist, which biologically speaking, you'll never change that. Now, they're saying birthing parents. So they're saying non-birthing parents, also known as men, and moms being birthing parents. So they're changing their entire vernacular and completely confusing the heck out of a lot of folks. Also shows how much profit is in their product if you could have that long of a maternity leave of having 4 months.
Thanks. And then last, we also, as a company, have always tried to sort of be socially minded and not just be about bottom line profits. Created a really...
So, socially minded, that's a very trendy thing to say. But also, one of the things that concerns me, small businesses, I'm very pessimistic about any additional laws when it comes to parental leave, just because if you're a 5 employee shop or 10 employee shop, you lose 1 employee for any amount of time, it can be detrimental to the business. But another topic in and of itself. This is fascinating from a cultural perspective because, again, perhaps technically this is a new target market. The growth rate is there in terms of the number of people transitioning. So the market is expanding, but they're also alienating a good portion of the market. If Harry's Razors, and again, when you look at who buys razors, I'd venture to say women usually would spend more on razors than men. I mean, to me, if it's sharp, I don't care. I'll use it. Or, granted, these days, I'll just use the General Buzz thingamajig. Yes, I have the greatest vernacular, and obviously I know a lot about facial hair. But they also have a track record of alienating a lot of their customers. Famously, you had the Daily Wire, which is, again, the fastest growing media company, headquartered out of Nashville, Tennessee. Best known for Ben Shapiro. You also have Matt Walsh, who made the documentary What is a Woman. You have Brett Cooper, the comment section of Brett Cooper. They have Michael Knowles. They're a very fast growing company. Harry's Razors used to sponsor them. But then Michael Knowles, one of the talk show hosts over there, he said that men are men and women are women. And 2 people on Twitter complained, saying that those are pejorative things to say, they're mean. And Harry's dropped the sponsorship. Now, dropping the sponsorship caused the Daily Wire to go out and make their own razor company. So now they literally have, they put a video out with 20 million views in a couple days, where the Daily Wire now has a monthly mail subscription product for razors. And of course they call it Jeremy's Razors after one of the co-founders, Jeremy Boring. But in doing so, Harry's Razors quite literally created their own competition. They didn't, in terms of a economical razor with a subscription model, that's why Harry's Razors rose to fame. They were subsequently purchased by global conglomerate Unilever, which is a hilariously hypocritical. No, the hypocrisy over at Unilever is quite hilarious and unpalatable. They're the company that owns Axe body spray, which lies to you. If you spray it on you, women don't come to you. I tried. Very disappointed at the drugstore. But in all seriousness, that's supposed to be, hot women come to you. Then they also own Dove, which empowers body positivity, also known as obesity. So the same company that claims to empower women also uses them as marketing vessels to attract men. So there's a lot of hypocrisy in and of itself in that statement with Unilever. But in terms of business, it's marked by Harry's Razors. They were one of the perhaps the most successful in terms of a subscription model for razors. They were a pioneer of that segment. And in doing that one thing with Daily Wire, they created a huge competition, and now Daily Wire is growing with all those razor subscribers. Doing this is only going to fuel the Daily Wire. Because if you think of Harry's Razors to begin with, maybe most of the customers were men. In the United States, about 50-50 break in the United States is conservative versus liberal. And as this becomes a political issue for many people, about half your sales might be gone because of this. And again, you can debate the long-term effect socially and culturally from the growing movement and the percentage use base, percentage identifying as the trans community. But how many years will it take for that growth rate to supplant or to exceed the number of customers you lose? I can't help but think there has to be more of a cultural reason, or maybe they are really being socially minded, and like they're saying, they don't care about the profits. If you're that size of company, you could surely absorb a loss because they have all the different brands to carry them, so one can offset the other. But it's fascinating to see, this is just driving fuel to the competition right now. And culturally, I don't know if there's going to be a boycott like we saw with Bud Light, where there's a significant boycott where, compared to last year, they lost $390 million in sales at Bud Light. Will Harry's Razors have the same downfall in their sales figures? Which again, this is more difficult to boycott because if you're subscribing, you have to actually make an effort to go and stop subscribing. So traditionally, subscriptions are usually lucrative because the rate at which people stop is pretty low because it takes an effort to go out there and cancel your subscription, whether it be a gym membership, Netflix, what have you. Same thing with razors. Because it's more of a burden to quit this than just switch beers literally inches away and grab another pack of swill. Is it because it's a higher burden to boycott it? Will be if any boycott will be less effective. Let me in the comments what you think. It'll be fascinating to see, does boycott Harry's become something that's trending? What's it going to do for their business long term? Will they get those customers back, or will the new customers increase at such an exponential rate that they'll actually make more profit doing this? That'd be fascinating to see. And from a business perspective, perhaps this will be taught in the university soon, right next to the Bud Light class. Perhaps it'll be business brilliance, but right now, surely seems like a business blunder, though we have something more interesting for that show later today. Now, other interesting culture news, you have NASCAR. You have their driver suspended indefinitely for liking a pejorative meme about George Floyd. Now, George Floyd, if you wind back the cultural clock a couple of years, he almost achieved sainthood for people, again, as this somehow became a political issue, people on the left. Now, in terms of his background, many people will critique that he was a career criminal. He robbed a pregnant woman at gunpoint, multiple theft, more illicit use of substance that you can count. And the controversy came because the police officer famously put the knee on, it looked like his back. We were told it was his neck. And unfortunately, depending on your belief system, George Floyd did pass during that interaction. Now, the police argued that they did exactly according to the book, but there's a lot of controversy around it, and quickly, literal monuments were put up and erected to George Floyd. So it became a very politically charged issue, very emotionally charged. Everyone was up in arms about the situation. The whole nation tuned in. Now, it looks like the NASCAR driver by the name of Noah Gragson, it looks like he accidentally, oh no, I shouldn't say accidentally, I think he apologized, so it certainly does seem intentional, but he liked a meme, and it looks like past Sunday, Noah did not drive past Sunday Cup Series in Michigan at International Speedway, and Legacy Motors Club, the club at which he drives for, they indefinitely suspended him, saying, quote, "We have made a decision to suspend Noah Gragson effective immediately regarding his actions that do not represent the values of the team." And the Cup, it looks like they went on to say that Josh Berry will be driving number 42 in this coming weekend's race in Michigan. And it looks like last week, Tuesday, in terms of how this news report broke, it looks like it was a man by the name of Daniel McFadden. And this journalist, it looks like he's, a lot of people are saying he's politically charged. I certainly agree that is part of it. But it looks like this person does report on NASCAR for a living, which I'm astonished to hear is actually a job in and of itself. But it looks like this person is a reporter for the Arkansas Democrat Gazette and the NASCAR writer at Front Stretch. And this journalist, who again went out of his way to actually see that this gentleman liked a meme in which I believe is a pejorative thing where they had the crab from, I believe, his Little Mermaid. Instead of Under the Sea, which is the song from the Disney film originally, it said Under the Knee. And it had a picture of George Floyd on it, which shows a correlation to how he passed. So a lot of people were upset about it. I guess people who appreciate dark humor might have liked it, but it got a lot of backlash. Now, interestingly enough, it seems like there's the same or more backlash when it comes to the reporter finding out that Josh had went out and liked the Instagram post of that. Now, the reporter was immediately ratioed. Now, in terms of their career, I think they got what they wanted. This reporter got over 1 million views when he tweeted saying, "I did my due diligence to make sure it was wow, it was poor grammar to say the least." He said, "Noah Gragson made a mistake. I did my due diligence to make sure it was real. Check out my Front Stretch column," which is the column he writes for. And he, ironically enough, he was incredibly viscerally ratioed on the Twitter, and he had to lock it down because so many people were saying pejorative things to him in and of itself, saying, how much time do you have on yourself, and are you proud of yourself for destroying this man's life? And in terms of Gragson, which he did apologize, which again usually does nothing. I've yet to see someone who makes a social faux pas nowadays, or a social error nowadays, actually get their job back or actually improve the situation culturally. You saw this with a baseball player who previously boycotted a games, or it was the LA Dodgers who invited the Nuns of Perpetual Indulgence, which is if you're religious, it's a pejorative drag show in which they make fun of Christ using the cross as an actual stripper pole, which is disgusting. I find that disgusting and abhorrent. And this player said he didn't believe in them, and he tried to boycott them. And within a day, he bent the knee, and he said, "Oh no, I'm going to take sensitivity training, also known as re-education, from 1984. Do not drink. Do not make a drinking game, because again, as that book becomes more and more like real life, or sometimes life is worse than that, I can't help but notice I reference that book more and more by George Orwell. But the baseball player didn't get his job back. So he apologized, and of course, it didn't help. Now, the NASCAR player Gregson said, quote, "I am disappointed in myself for my lack of attention and actions on social media," unquote. Which, he goes on to say, "Understand the severity of the situation. I love and appreciate everyone. I try to treat everyone equally, no matter who you are," unquote. It almost felt like he had a gun to his head, or a sniper was putting a red dot right there, just completely perpetuating, saying everything he thinks he needs to say, but they never get redemption. Now, in terms of your private life, like if you make a mistake to a friend or a coworker, it is of course appropriate to apologize one-on-one, because you usually, if they believe in redemption, they'll give you another shot. You'll have a conversation. In terms of mass public interaction, I've never seen it really become constructive. Even if he does genuinely believe that he's sad and he's sorry for liking a meme, it's not like they're all going to come back and say, "Oh no, we forgive you. Now come join the driving team." His career is over. Which also, again, ironically, people say the United States is racist. This is one race. Some people are saying it was a racially charged meme in terms of the George Floyd incident. Now, legally, that was never actually on the roster. The arresting officer, I believe, was Asian American, but race was. That's what the media said. It was all about race, but that's actually not what was in the courtroom. But I digress. Just a hint of racism, you'll lose your social. You'll be socially ostracized. You'll lose your job. You'll never work a day again in your life in the United States. Which many would argue that's how far the United States has come. That we find racism so viscerally disgusting. You would never work with someone around that. I mean, they would just be completely pushed out in every vector of society. But I digress. From a cultural perspective, it'll be interesting to see, does he find a new team to race for? Does he go to another league? Or is he perpetually unemployed? It'll be interesting to see, but right now he's suspended indefinitely. So perhaps he will catch up on the next lap, or maybe he'll turn to the left a little more. I don't know. This is probably a pun in there that has to do with NASCAR. Personally, I always thought NASCAR was kind of like tennis. Probably pretty fun to do. Driving really fast would be awesome, but to watch, I don't know about that. We'll have to see. But time shall tell. Other interesting culture news, you have the Barbie movie passing $1 billion, which it hit $1 billion in sales a mere 17 days after it was released. Now, I thought the bar could not get any lower in terms of what Americans will put in their bodies, both in terms of food, but also entertainment, media. I should not be surprised that it hit $1 billion. Now, in terms of the breakdown of the box office, and again, this is revenue, not profit, it was $459 million in North America and $572 million internationally. Now, of course, keep in mind, when you hear box office, that's not how much the studio makes. You split that with a movie theater, then you have cost of production, cost of advertising. But given these numbers, it sounds like it'll probably make a profit, even with their huge, the marketing department was brilliant. They had a huge advertising campaign. And in terms of the numbers, it looks like it's the second blockbuster this year. You had Super Mario movies, which surpassed $1 billion as well. And it looks like in terms of post-pandemic era, it's only one of a few companies who have hit $1 billion. You had Spider-Man No Way Home, which, yeah, I can't, without Tobey Maguire, I would never see it, but that's just me. You also had Top Gun Maverick, which Tom Cruise, he's pretty good at selling tickets. Jurassic World Dominion, and Avatar The Way of Water. All of a sudden, I'm not so impressed with the intellect of people who are tuning into all these things, because half those movies seem mediocre, rudimentary at best. Now, it looks like Barbie was actually hitting a milestone, after just 17 days. It became the fastest Warner Brothers movie ever to hit that $1 billion club. And it's the 8th movie in the company's 100 years of history to hit $1 billion. So fiscally speaking, it turns out this is probably fascinatingly, phenomenally good for the executives. Now, it also looks like it passed Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2, which previously held the record for hitting $1 billion, but they hit it in 19 days. Which also goes to show you how far society has fallen when Harry Potter actually had these rare things that you might have to dust off the dictionary They actually had things like morals, values. You could actually learn from the films and the books, as opposed to the Barbie movie, which, again, is the most pejorative thing in terms of every man. And again, I've only seen. I'll admit, I don't hate myself enough to see the film or to hurt myself like that. If that would please the audience, maybe. If you really want to see my critique of the whole film, perhaps I'll force myself to watch it. That'd be a dark day and probably I would need a recovery, perhaps. But it shows you how far, perhaps, how people's intellect has fallen. The movie mentions the patriarchy 6 times. It's not kid appropriate, so if you're taking a kid there, you're morally and mentally vacuous. It's PG-13 for very good reasons. They include masturbation jokes. Every other line is just talking about the patriarchy. It misrepresents Mattel, Mattel's, I don't know how dumb they are in terms of allowing this movie to be made, in terms of the Mattel board of directors. If you look at the real company, they have about a 50-50 split. I believe there's 6-5 in terms of women-men breakdown of the board of directors. In the movie, they make it look like it's exclusively men. And of course, they cast men in the worst shadow. Every man in the movie is a moron or a misogynistic a-hole. And there's no moral to the story. At the end of the movie, the moral is men and women can't coexist. They're not supposed to partner together. It's hard to fathom how low of an IQ this movie just, maybe it chips away at your IQ when you watch the movie, but it certainly does not help the viewer grow and develop. And it certainly doesn't make Mattel look good. So it's fascinating to see. Perhaps it is just the nostalgia and the name and the branding, which the marketing department didn't mention a single thing I did. They don't mention the fact that it's so negative in terms of the men and women interactions. It doesn't say how bad it makes it look men. It doesn't even mention the word patriarchy in any of the marketing materials. So the company, Mattel, knew if they let that leak, the movie would bomb epically. Which I suspect whoever in the marketing department certainly deserves a raise, because they bolstered this movie so well, and they just highlighted all the things they wanted to, which of course is the purpose of marketing and advertising, but it didn't actually show the meat of the film. It didn't show the actual content. So, unethical? Yeah, I would say so, but it's astonishing that it passed $1 billion. But time shall tell to see, do Americans start increasing the bar for like their taste for movies? I would say the outlook is not so good. Now, going over to the political part of the podcast, you have Joe Rogan saying Kari Lake election appeared to have some fraud, and the media had a huge meltdown. Now, in terms of historicals in the situation with Kari Lake, she was running for governor over in Arizona, and she campaigned very hard on the idea that Trump had lost the presidential election because of election fraud. Trump also endorsed her, which ironically it didn't turn out very well at all for the midterms. He chose a lot of losers. Oh, I would say both morally and intellect in terms of losers. But, well, I wouldn't say that. He would certainly use that term. But he chose someone like Mehmet Oz, known as Dr. Oz, who didn't live in the state he was campaigning in. And also, historically, Dr. Oz, politically speaking, very much on the left side of the aisle. And a lot of people just speculate Trump thought, hey, he's on TV too, let's have him be into politics. But, yeah, that didn't resonate with the voters, obviously. And he lost to John Fetterman, who, again, had a stroke and could barely talk. But Republicans still lost to that. So, again, this is someone who, politically speaking, she hooked her wagon up with Trump. She campaigned very heavily on the election fraud, which, again, historically speaking, every election has some fraud. The debate comes in, what's the percentage? Would it make a difference? And she did take it to court. So she lost the election. She took it to court. Specifically, she was concerned that Maricopa County, which is one of the most populous, dense counties in Arizona. Now, it looks like, according to the Supreme Court, again, the Maricopa County Supreme Court, Judge Peter A. Thompson, he said that Lake failed to prove her claim that Maricopa County did not verify signatures on mail ballots as required by law. Now, the state Supreme Court declined to hear nearly all of Lake's appeals, saying that there was no evidence to support her claims that more than 35,000 ballots were added to vote totals. So, from a legal perspective, again, people still believe she won, people still believe she lost. Currently, with all the data we have now and all the data that she brought, it appears that she legitimately lost that race. Now, Joe Rogan, he is having a recent podcast interview, and people are freaking out. So this is with Valuetainment. I believe he's the owner as well as the main speaker, Patrick David.
How much election fraud do you think is real?
Here we go, Joe. You want to go to election fraud?
Yeah, because I don't think it's zero.
No.
It's
no
not
way.
zero. I think we could all agree it's not zero.
No way it's not zero.
And we know that these voting machines can be fucked with.
Yeah.
And we know that there's some irregularities, all that Kari Lake stuff in Arizona that they're trying to dismiss. It doesn't look like that's invalid. It looks like there's...
And just a real quick pause there. When it comes to voting machines, partially because I work in IT, anything electronic can be hacked. And even if it's not a physical hack, like a breaking in, you could have social engineering. You could actually have, in one case, you had a voting machine taking the votes and it put it on an SD card, like an old camera. You would have an SD card. And some of the SD cards didn't make it to the pile of cards to be counted. Now, again, the debate is, what is the percentage of fraud? Or in that case, where they have SD cards, it could either be malicious or non-malicious for getting to add one to the pile. And really, the hard part is proving that there's enough of that to swing the election.
real fraud there. It looks like there's some real shenanigans there. At the very...
Coincidentally, he nearly always helps one side of the political aisle, fascinatingly enough.
very least, there was voting machines that weren't working properly, and it seems very suspicious that a lot of them were in Republican areas. There's a lot of shenanigans. And I think there's coordinated efforts to make sure that certain people get elected. I don't know how far they go, but I know it's not zero.
Which, again, I don't know. It's fascinating to see so many people freak out about this. It's not like he's saying anything too outlandish. I don't think anyone would confidently say it's zero. Even if you wind back the clock, people think politics today is so ugly and disgusting, so visceral. We've had debates for as long as we can remember, and again, Republicans and Democrats have both sued and both complained when they lose. Even when you wind back the clock to when Al Gore lost, he was suing, I believe, you had the contingency, or the controversy where you had the ballots in Florida, and you wanted the recount. Both sides weren't happy when they didn't get what they want. So it's fascinating to see people blame one political aisle or say it's only one side. It's pretty standard that both sides are pretty upset and they cry when they don't win. The question is, can you produce enough evidence to show legitimately, or in this case, not prove that you illegitimately lost? That's a real thing that, again, it's kind of lost in the nuance. But I think most people would agree there's always some fraud. But again, what's that percentage? And of course, everyone's saying, "Oh no, now he's alt-right." And again, people keep fighting Joe Rogan. People keep trying to claim him like he's a football player in the draft. Like, oh, he's Republican. Oh, he's a Democrat. Oh no, he's libertarian. Like, he has so many different issues that probably at the end of the day, he's like a lot of folks where they kind of just feel politically alienated. And, have that old saying where Democrats are running off a cliff and, Republicans are just slowly crawling off a cliff. It's like, personally, I wish we had a little bit more options when it comes to third party or libertarian party, but I digress. There's a lot of money, and the odds are not always created equal when it comes to all the political ways that you need to go to get elected. But I always say, time shall tell. Other political news, you have Democrats putting forward legislation to tax AR-15 magazines and rifles at 1,000%. So you have do you want a semi-automatic rifle, just a semi-auto, 1,000% tax. Now, it looks like in terms of statistics, numerically, how many people put this bill, it was a little bit more than 24 House Democrats put forward legislation last Friday that would slap a assault weapon, quote unquote, and high capacity magazines with 1,000% excise tax. That would change the price of a rifle that usually goes for $500, which good AR-15, probably get a Smith & Wesson AR-15 for $500, depending on where you live. That would go from $500 to $5,000, which again makes it prohibitively unaffordable for most Americans, as many people are struggling to go paycheck to paycheck. And they say that the bill they hope it'll curb gun violence across the United States, which at least they're saying the quiet part are out loud in terms of gun confiscation and gun being just hurting the lower class. And think about this for a minute. You saw this with the National Firearms Act of 1934. They're saying, "Oh yeah, we're going to pass this law so that bad guys can't get the guns." Well, I don't know if this is a news flash, but bad guys don't follow the laws. Now, in 1934, they passed the NFA, or the National Firearms Act, that put a $200 tax stamp on special classes of weapons, including short-barreled rifles, short-barreled shotguns, machine guns, and later you had AOW, any other weapon, and also destructive devices known as DD. Now, $200 nowadays doesn't sound too bad. Don't get me wrong, it's a lot of money. That's like a gallon of gas in Chicago. Kidding, it's like maybe 2 gallons. But in terms of pricing, back then, you do the inflation calculator, $200 in 1934 was about $4,200 now. Now, thankfully, there was not a clause in there that adjusted for the cost of inflation. But it meant that if you want to purchase an item, to this day, if you want to buy a suppressor, which is legal in 42 states, you have to go out, you have to pay a sales tax, which is disgusting in and of itself, but you have to pay a $200 tax to the U.S. Treasury Department. And it requires special paperwork, including a extra photo passport, taken of your face, fingerprints. It's a very prohibitive process. And really, the whole thing was done and it just hurt people who can't afford it, which is fascinating to say that they keep arguing that they care about the lower class, but all these laws would do would disarm people who are of the lower class. People who are buku bucks, people who make 100 grand, 200 grand a year, they can still spend 5 grand on a rifle. That's not a very high percentage of their income. If you're barely struggling to make by, if you're making $33,000 a year, which is about the average salary in the United States or income in the United States, there's no way you can $5,000 compared to $33,000 a year salary. You can't afford to defend yourself. I find that repugnant and disgusting beyond all belief. I can barely quantify. I should have an extra thesaurus on one of these monitors. Now, this is actually the second time they've introduced this bill. This one was introduced by Representative Don Bayer, a Democrat from Virginia, as well as 24 other House Democrats. Now, this 1,000% tax will be put on any semi-automatic assault weapon, which, if you like the previously introduced bills, defined a semi-automatic rifle or pistol with a fixed magazine of 10 or more rounds and have various features, also known as black rifle scary. Because again, mechanically speaking, pretty much all rifles are semi-automatic. If you look at the most popular rifle in the United States by volume of units sold, it's the AR-15, partially because the patent's expired, or the design patent, so anyone can create a basic AR-15. It was originally made by Eugene Stoner over at Armor Light Company, ironically enough, over in California, decades ago, before the Vietnam War. I believe it was 1950, what was it, 60? It's quite some time. And it's actually considered an antique if it's an old enough rifle. But I can't, more than 10 rounds? That's, again, not the standard. The standard capacity magazine that was designed with is a 30-round magazine. And again, we've had these laws before. The 1994 assault weapons ban, the U.S. government had 3 independent studies. It had no effect on crime. It had no major effect on mass shootings. Columbine is probably one of the most prolific, horrifying acts that happened under that law. It didn't stop it. You also have specific states where these are in place as well, which again, a good use case is the city of Chicago. They've had many of these restrictive laws, and yet nothing's changed in decades. Many would say it was a cultural issue. Another topic for another time, but it looks like, 10 or more rounds if you're a civilian. Government, there's no restrictions, of course, even though the most horrific acts in history have all come from governments. But I moderately digress. Let's dive back in. And in terms, can you fathom a gun that used to cost $2,000 now going for $20,000? And Bayer, the same gentleman, argued last year that this would, quote, curb the epidemic of gun violence. Which, again, it wouldn't. We've gotten to the point where you could print a magazine. So if you have a 3D printer, it's a glorified rectangular box with a spring in it. So anyone with a 3D printer could make one on their own. If you're really desperate, I suppose you can make one out of wood or just take sheet metal and bend it and have a spring in there. It's pretty rudimentary technology in terms of a magazine. We've had the design for well over 100 years. And again, there's this is saying, oh yeah, it's still legal, but only if you're rich. So not only would it not solve the gun violence, it just actively hurt people of lower socioeconomic income. A lot of people give crap to High Point being a cheap pistol, but at the end of the day, it's one of the most reliable ways to defend your family. It's a sub $200 9mm pistol. That's perhaps the most popular caliber. But again, these laws would just hurt the lower class. And call me old-fashioned, but I think all men were created equal. Everyone should have the opportunity to defend themselves and their family. Now, in terms of the odds of this getting passed, I would say, hopefully, outlook not so good. And granted, the Supreme Court finally, for the first time in decades, has more people who believe in the Constitution who do not. So, actually, the Supreme Court has already ruled previously that you cannot ban guns in common use. A rifle, which comprises more than 50% of all rifle sales, I would certainly argue from a legal perspective, is well in common use. So from a legal perspective, I don't know how much grounds it has to stand on. Now, that being said, it's concerning because, of course, every law that is passed by the United States government is backed by a gun held by the United States government. So I just tell people, you should always take all your laws seriously because, remember, they enforce them. And when it comes to certain gun laws, it could sometimes be horrific and deadly for people they're enforced against. So, depending on where you live, write your political representatives appropriately and make sure you're active in this development. Now, going on to the business blunder of the day, you have Yellow Trucking confirming their bankruptcy. Now, it looks like this is Chapter 11 bankruptcy, and unfortunately, they're going to be biting the dust. They're a 99-year-old trucking company headquartered out of Nashville, Tennessee. And I also want to take a moment to appreciate everyone taking the time to comment. Now, it was really cool to see. I had this business blunder a couple weeks ago, saying they're on the brink of bankruptcy, and they're starting to liquidate some assets. And a couple of people in the comments hinted that they were truckers, and they had experience in the industry. And they enlightened me about some of the issues that came from the management perspective of the business, hinting that it wasn't just because it was prohibitively costly to have a unionized employee base. And I always appreciate the more insight. If you have some more data, you can always reach me at thetoppingshow@gmail.com. I'll even, if you want me, I'll give you a shout out. More information, the better, as we learn about all these fascinating business, political, and cultural cases. Now, it looks like in terms of the fiscals of why they're having to declare bankruptcy, the company had been having a astronomical amount of debt loaded up. It looks like they had more than $1 billion in debt to come to mature next year. And the labor issues also led to the costly stalemate with the Teamsters Union. This according to the Wall Street Journal. The company also had large contracts with Home Depot, Walmart, and it looks like they even had some federal defense contracts as well. So it wasn't an issue of not having enough customers, I would think. Perhaps they decreased the amount of business that are transacting with them, or their costs just kept ballooning. And there are a lot of cost issues, not just labor, but you also have the cost of diesel. And the United States is not right now, it's fossil fuels, ridiculously, they are becoming a political issue. But in the United States, the cost of fossil fuels is just growing up exponentially as we continue to refuse to exploit the natural resources that we do have on hand in lieu of bringing them from, actually buying them from countries who hate us, like Venezuela, which, again, is a communist, disgusting, oppressive government, but we would rather support them than drill our own land. A fascinating topic for another time, perhaps. So interesting to see. They also received one of the largest federal bailouts during the 2020 pandemic, and rendering the government one of Yellow's largest creditors. So unfortunately, it seems they're pretty loaded up on the debt, and maybe they just could not get enough business to pay off the principal or the interest on it. And they have some of these debt that is actually coming up to mature, meaning they would have to pay them pretty quick. But it is unfortunate to see what was nearly a 100-year-old United States-based company go out of business. And hopefully, as the demand for trucking increases, as we purchase more products to the United States and more products are moving around, hopefully all the employees who were at Yellow are able to find jobs at other trucking companies, so there's not too many jobs lost overall. And I wish, hopefully, they have the best luck finding those new roles. But I would say time shall tell. Maybe someone will swoop in by the assets of the company and hopefully get them new jobs, but we shall see. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to tune in today. Also, we're trying to get to 3,000 subscribers by the end of August, so I greatly appreciate you taking the time to click that subscribe button. Also, taking the time to like and comment, also greatly appreciate. It really helps the channel grow and develop as we try to make the content and production better and better. Also, don't forget to tell your family, tell your coworkers, heck, tell your friends, heck, even tell your enemies, tell anyone and everyone. Just stay safe and fight the good fight.